This is the Alembic Files, and I'm Al.
And I'm Theo.
We're going to continue speaking about the Constitution, but before we go into it for this particular show, and Theo will take this away for us, I want folks to understand something. If you happen to find yourself in a local court, city, town, whatever, or a county court, or even perhaps a state court, you might be provided constitutional rights because nobody knows any better on that level. And there are stories about lawyers in federal court taking a case and not realizing that they're in admiralty and having to be briefed in a matter of minutes by the judge as to what goes and what doesn't go. So there are even lawyers who find themselves in federal court and don't know what's going on. So, yeah, everybody speaks about constitutional rights. Very few people ever use them. They think that they're just there. But if you ever get into a situation, and freedom of expression is a good one, you'll find out how quick you don't have rights. But that's for another day as well. In this case, we'll go back and speak to this, but remember, the word constitutional rights gets bandied about a lot. Most people don't know what they're talking about. Most people don't realize they have them or they don't have them because they never really get into that realm. They just suppose they're in place. But when you go to federal court, it's another whole deal, and those judges know exactly what goes. And that's one of the reasons, if not the chief reason, you cannot bring constitutional protection for a private person. More about that later. So, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, we've spoken on the so-called Reconstruction Acts before, but it's so significant, and James Montgomery writes so much about it. He writes about that more than any other topic in his book, The United States is Still a British Colony. We need to devote one more show to that before we leave off with it. It's highly significant. Related to that, in an ancillary fashion, you want another proof that the Constitution is dead. There's that famous, semi-famous letter from Thomas Jefferson. I'll have to paraphrase it, but you just made me think of it, where he says that he based all of our liberties, all of our rights on this, and then he cited the 10th Amendment, where the powers not specifically delineated to the feds were reserved to the states. You remember that letter?
I tell you what, it's not very clear about it, no.
Okay, well, the 10th Amendment is the single most defunct amendment of them all. I mean, that was killed completely. That was tested in that Civil War. That's gone, the 10th Amendment.
Okay.
You still have patriot types citing or hoping they can cite the 10th Amendment. You can't. Good luck.
Real quick, and I'll save it for a show when we get to some of these court cases, but I think you'll remember when a listener sent me an article out of the Wall Street Journal probably 2 years ago, maybe 2010, I don't know, around there. And it was between two women in the Chicago area. They got involved in kind of a feud. One of them did something foolish in the other's mailbox, which made it federal, and here we go. And that woman then became a defendant. What happens is she wants to use the 10th Amendment as a remedy. And the judge told her, you're not the party that should be bringing up the 10th Amendment for protection.
Yeah.
The states are better off doing that. And it's true, but there you go. There's an example of being told, you're not using the 10th.
So that shows that only the states were a party to the Constitution. However, even beyond that, the 14th Amendment killed off all that when it was declared that the Fed trumps the state level. Let's get into this 14th Amendment thing. James Montgomery writes, first he calls the 14th Amendment the touchstone of the patriot community. And he says, most any patriot type knows about the 14th Amendment and how huge that was. But what he writes is they know about it only in a partial way. They don't really know how important it is. I mean, the patriot community will typically cite how the 14th Amendment reversed the citizenship we the little people, we the little incorporated people. Prior to the 14th Amendment, we were state citizens first and then Fed citizens second. After the 14th Amendment, now we're federalized citizens first, and the state citizenship is subordinate to that. Most any patriot type knows about that, but Montgomery says it's so much faster than that. And I have a lot of quotes in front of me from this chapter. Again, the book by James Montgomery is The United States is Still a British Colony, and he writes a lot about the so-called Reconstruction. It was really a reconquest. He writes a lot about it throughout the whole book. However, this chapter, called Will the Real Government Please Stand Up, this chapter deals almost exclusively with the Reconstruction. Now, the Reconstruction was all about the 14th Amendment. And did you know, Al, I didn't know this until last night when I got my little useless pocket Constitution that I used to carry around with me. I used to have one like in my car, just...
Is this the famous one that comes from the Cato Institute?
I used to have one of those. This one, I'm looking, and it doesn't say the publisher. It has a picture of Washington, and it's got a picture of Washington handing you a feather pen with the Constitution facing you, the reader, like he's asking you to sign it. That's great.
It is good.
Well, I was looking at this last night, reading the amendments, and did you know, this is interesting, did you know the 14th Amendment is the longest of all the amendments in forms of the verbosity of the text?
No.
Yeah.
Well, we read from it one time, and it does have a number of sections to it. And that's why you were saying you weren't all that familiar with the one that talked about giving, they do not give aid to the rebels.
Yep, that's Section 3. Right, I'm looking at it. That's Section 3. Yeah, that'll probably come up later. Yep. Well, okay. Montgomery, after acknowledging that the 14th Amendment is the touchstone of the patriot community, and, of course, the average Joe on the street that watches CNN or something like that or reads his local paper, they don't even get it that far. Of course, all they know is, the 14th Amendment, that's the one that gave the slaves the right to vote. Yeah, okay, that's the public pablum. So the patriots get it a little bit more than that. But here's where the patriots don't get it. Montgomery starts off and says, most people, if plagued with a recurring headache, take a pain reliever, and the headache goes away, or appears to go away, when in fact, all they have done is deal with a symptom that caused the headache, not the cause. Oh, you have not dealt with the cause. And now he writes, many patriots today are dealing with the symptoms, like taxes, driving versus traveling, and the zip code, etc. All these are important issues and have their place, but it's not the root cause of the problem. This is what he identifies as the root cause of the problem. The lawful, de jure, United States government, and the U is not capitalized there. That government, which was created by the 1787 Constitution/treaty between the states, was made null and void by the fraudulent Congress that passed the 14th Amendment. So it's not just that our citizenship has been reversed, the level of it. It's that the entire 1787 contractual Constitution was forever violated. And there's no remedy. There's no way to undo that. They'd have to rewrite another one. And that's because the 14th Amendment, the Reconstruction, when the northern rump of Congress unlawfully threw out the duly elected representatives of 10 southern states and at least one northern one, New Jersey, they just marched in with the army again, and this is 2 years after the Civil War was concluded. these same states, these representatives had voted, along with most the northern senators, they had voted to ratify the 13th Amendment, which freed the slaves. But now, since they wouldn't ratify the 14th Amendment, then this northern rump of Congress brought back the military. I'm sure they used a lot of excuses and euphemisms, but this really, well, let me give you some more quotes here. Montgomery writes, "How is it in the freest country in the world and a nation that prides itself on our history, could you have 200+ million people ignorant of the truth and that care so little about the destruction of our country? The information I am sharing with you is purposely not taught in the public schools. If the government taught this in the public schools, it would cause the rebirth of American patriotism. Americans would demand our former overthrown Republican form of government and that the laws of God Almighty be adhered to. We were promised in the Constitution a Republican form of government. By the laziness and greed of the American people over the years, our lawful government was stolen, but not without our help." Skipping forward a bit, he says, in the Civil War, the slaves just changed masters after it, and the white people enfranchised, incorporated, and sold themselves into slavery. Whites, along with blacks, were made legal fictions, so they could be owned and taxed by the king. However, the only way this could be done is by destroying the Constitution, but they had to do it in a way that no one would recognize. And he starts in with the proof now. And did you know this? And I'm wondering, the more I read this, the more I see that it's got to tie in with what we read about in Dark Union by Guttridge and the other prof.
You never remember Neff. You never remember him.
Thanks. Neff. I should remember the shorter name, huh?
Well, I would think, but you're saying it. That's okay.
Neff and Guttridge. Thank you. Now, did you know this? Al, in 1863, I guess Lincoln was preparing or hoping for the positive end to the war. December 8th, 1863, Montgomery writes, President Lincoln declared by proclamation amnesty and reconstruction for the Southerners so that they could be readmitted into the Union. This action, along with what Lincoln was doing with the money, is why Lincoln had to be killed. The South could not be allowed back into the Union without their enfranchisement. So Lincoln was going to be clement,
right,
magnanimous with the South. And in the back notes here, in the footnotes, he gives Lincoln's oath, but he doesn't give it here. Montgomery writes, compare the readmittance oath in President Lincoln's proclamation of 1863, and that's back in a footnote. Compare that to the following oath requirement required by Congress under the Reconstruction Acts, which, of course, happened after the war. Skipping forward, it says, shall cause a registration to be made of the male citizens of the United States, 21 years of age and upwards, resident in each county or parish in the state or states included in his district, which registration shall include only those persons who are qualified to vote, who shall have taken the following oath. I, blank, do solemnly swear or affirm in the presence of Almighty God that I am a citizen of the state of blank, and I have resided in said state for blank months, and now reside in the county of blank. So you have all of these adhesion contract oaths now where you have to declare you're a citizen. Okay, and Montgomery writes after this quote, he says, you will note in the above oath, Congress creates legal residence for anyone taking the oath, and that this, get this, and that this is done today by registering to vote and made a requirement in order to vote. The same legal disability still takes place today, when you register to vote.
Mm-hmm.
You will also notice that the oath makes you declare that you were not disenfranchised by taking part in the Civil War, which means that before the Civil War, Americans were franchised citizens, that is, incorporated. I covered this in part 1 of this book. By the state's adoption of the Constitution, those that lived in the states became legal residents, incorporated, enfranchised, instead of sui juris freemen, which was granted to them by the Declaration of Independence. So this gets back to how George Washington was a scumbag and created the district states to supersede the geographic states in 1791 and some other stuff. In the 14th Amendment, and here Montgomery refers to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, where the enemy, the judges and legislators and police cannot give aid and comfort to the enemy, according to the 14th Amendment. The enemy is anyone unincorporated, because the king cannot legally tax you without using the force of admiralty. The enemy is also anyone that refuses to swear the oath to the de facto government for the above reasons. Now, Al, so now we get into oaths. Al, I've heard you refer in the past to how at least the Jehovah's Witnesses got it right, because they, in some things, in that they, for example, they don't swear allegiance. They don't pledge allegiance to flags or anything like that. So yeah, and I agree with you. It's an interesting fact of history that the Jehovah's Witnesses were, after the Jewish people and the Gypsies, the Jehovah's Witness people in Germany, a small minority then, but they were targeted. They were third in line to be targeted for elimination in Nazi Germany. Did you know that, Al?
No. Nope.
Yeah, I had just read that in, historical fact.
Another one that's an eye-opener.
Yeah, and of course it's a sorry statement for, you look at the 98, the vast majority of the Protestant churches in Germany, of course, sidled up next to Hitler and encouraged him and voted for him.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been the case. It still is the case here in present-day United States of America.
Yeah, it's the case now, isn't it?
Well, it's the fact that the churches are far and away guiltier for blurring the lines between the separation of church and state than the state has ever been. You take a look at the 501c3s here. Nobody told them to do that. They could survive very well without that. So they entered into a compact, shaking hands, if you will, with the devil. And so is this any kind of surprise? And as we all know, most mainstream denominations, I mean, they're dead as anything. They're just dead as rocks. So, I mean, what's the big deal about people getting all fired up about Christianity or anything else, seeping into the decision-making of our leaders? It just doesn't happen. That's why I don't care about those clowns. What was it, the Council for National Policy or something? What is that?
Yes, yeah.
Everybody, so people are really concerned that these supposed righteous Christians, which they are not, are actually impacting policy. And it's like, no, they're not. I couldn't care less what they're doing down there. In fact, I wish more would join, because they're rendered useless anyway. They think they're kicking ass, but they're not. So yeah, the fact that the church is sidled up to the Fuhrer, I understand completely. I mean, look what the Vatican did. That was egregious. But, again, Protestant churches looked the other way when it started hitting the fan.
Well, they're incorporated to it. They got the 501c3 and state incorporation papers, so they're just serving their real master.
Yeah, I'm sure the day is going to come, and that's the real danger. I mean, most pew sitters don't understand what that's all about.
Well, they sure don't. Well,
no, and because you never really see it in play. And if you ask most of those, and we'll just pick on the Protestants, and I can do that because I once was one, they don't know what's going on. They don't even know why, well, if you would ask them, why should you go to heaven? What would they say? If you're a good person. So bang, you don't even know why you're in church. So,
well, they'll say, because I gave myself to Jesus Christ.
Well, I'll tell you what, I haven't heard that too many times, and if I did, it's from someone who actually understands what's going on.
But the problem with that is they may have done so, but their church gave itself to the state.
Oh, without a doubt. And we're not beating this to the ground because it's not that important after a fact, but that is they don't see that actually working in action. They don't feel the hand of the government upon them. Where I was going at the outset of this was that there'll come a time when the church will be impinged upon by the government, the state, because of that relationship. And it is not far-fetched in the near future that if a preacher is preaching the second coming of Christ in a new kingdom, that can be construed as treasonous, terrorist.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's put it this way. That famous exchange between Sir Thomas More and Will, his firebrand, I guess, son-in-law, about you leave the laws in place, and the firebrand's son-in-law said, well, I to get at the bad guys, I'd cut down every law in the land. And then Thomas More says to him, and what would you do when the devil turns around? And there's nothing that you have to protect yourself. But in a situation like this, people don't think it's a big deal getting a 501c3, but there will be a time when the bear is going to turn around and eat them, if you know what I mean.
But yes, Al, but it really is a big deal now. It's only because of ignorance and greed that they don't see it. I mean, you and I know the horrendous things that are occurring across this land. And in secret, people meeting in secret, doing some really nasty things in groves and high places, and none of that could happen if the church had its head, the churches had its head out of the sand.
Yeah, I'll just say yes to that. They feel they are exercising a certain morality, but they're not. And when push comes to shove, I mean, they'll side with whatever power it looks like is going to take hold of them. They're not going to resist, not at all.
Well, to get back to the Reconstruction here, Montgomery cites that in 1866, the president, who at that time would have been Johnson, Lincoln's VP, the president proclaimed that the insurrection had been completely ended. He said, this is a partial quote, "And I do further proclaim that the said insurrection is at an end, and that peace, order, tranquility, and civil authority now exist." So, 1 year later, the northern rump of Congress that were, of course, in the pocket of the international banksters, they declared that there was all kinds of horrible things happening down there to the blacks, and so we had to send the military down there to protect them again. And so here's Johnson, the president, saying everything's fine down there. The war's over, no problem, in 1866. Okay, so when Johnson did that, proclaimed the insurrection at an end, everything's fine, there's peace, order, and tranquility, Montgomery writes, but again, the power behind the United States government would not stand for this. So Congress passed the Reconstruction Acts. President Johnson vetoed the acts because they were unconstitutional. Below are some excerpts from his veto message. Now I'm going to read, it's about 5 or 6 sentences from President Andrew Johnson's rather passionate veto act. He was really pleading with these people not to do this. All right, here goes. He says, and this also tells you just how heinous the Reconstruction Act really was that we're not told today. President Johnson says, "It is plain that the authority here given to the military officer," the one that would be ruling in the South now, "it amounts to absolute despotism. But to make it still more unendurable, this bill provides that it may be delegated to as many subordinates as he chooses to appoint shall punish or cause to be punished. Such a power has not been wielded by any monarch in England for more than 500 years. In all that time, no people who spoke the English language have borne such servitude. It reduces the whole population of the 10 states, all persons of every color, sex, and condition, and every stranger within their limits, to the most abject and degrading slavery. No master ever had a control so absolute over the slaves as this bill gives to the military officers over both white and colored persons. What do you think about that, Al?
Well, I can tell you from down in the South, Southerners who are not necessarily, ones I've met that aren't, don't have all the warm and fuzzies for blacks, even they will admit that probably racial problems that exist today go back to the Reconstruction Acts. Because what happened, and I don't think folks understand this, you got your freedom, but the problem also is, what do you do now? And so one day, the institution, or at least what you knew as home, is gone. Now what do you do? And that was a real problem. So, this is not exactly what you were thinking or had in mind when you asked me that question. But I'll say here's another example of the Reconstruction Acts quite probably guilty of creating and getting off on a bad foot racial relations in this country. So you can look at that as well as the legacy that we have, and that is still, I don't know, to a certain degree, what would you say, 100% amicable relations between all races. It still hasn't happened, and that's one of the reasons. And had you thought of that, or?
Yeah, it's very possible.
Yeah. So it's not the sexy thing that people are looking for with regard to that, because you're headed down the road of governments and courts and such. But there's another thing that deepened the divide between races.
Oh, for sure. When you read Al, when you read Johnson's words here, it really makes you feel for the guy. He seems like he wasn't such a bad guy. You also wish he could have, if he felt this strongly about it, why didn't he take it to the streets and get the people on his side? Well, of course, that would have meant he would have been Lincolned.
If he broke from, that's why, and people accuse us of us relying too much on the old KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. But it is. There is a power behind the government that has sought to overtake the government and now has. But even back over 100 years ago, this was happening. I think you could even say it was happening almost the minute that we became a new nation. But when you got a certain amount of people in power at that time, that's what they told Lincoln. Lincoln knew where it was at. Here's what you do, here's what you don't do. And in 1863, I believe, Lincoln announced in the Gettysburg Address that he wasn't going to go along with the game plan. This was too crazy. I really do believe that no matter what kind of Turk he might have been, or despot, or whatever anybody else does to throw tomatoes at him, and I don't think it by any means, he was what he's portrayed to be in any movie you've ever seen. But because the guy knew what was going on. You take the presidency, you understand what goes with it. And in 63, he didn't have the stomach for it. That's probably one of the things you got to respect him for. And then everybody was put on notice. This guy, as you've just mentioned before, Theo, that he's going to be conciliatory. He's going to be expeditious in trying to get this war brought to an end. And nobody wanted that except him. He wanted it. That's it.
Yeah, I would liken Lincoln's, that the oath that Lincoln came out with that was going to go easy on the Southerners, a couple of years before he was assassinated, I would liken that to Kennedy's speech before the Protestant convention in, what was it, Houston, where he said he wouldn't be beholden to any entity, meaning the Vatican.
Well, he said the Vatican. There's no two ways about it. He said the Vatican.
He did say it, okay.
Yeah, it was in 1959. He was still the senator then, and I do believe that's, you can see that on YouTube. You can see the actual video. And then, of course, he came out with that, for what is, for most people, a very esoteric statement I think, in April of 62, right after the Bay of Pigs failed, I think 10 days after. And then he went into that, there's a monolithic conspiracy which has the power to conscript vast resources. It doesn't have an army of its own, but it can get an army. And, of course, to me, that's very telling. And often I think that is the speech that is confused with being the mythic speech he supposedly made at Columbia weeks before he was assassinated. That speech never took place. That is urban legend.
Yeah.
But he did say something very, very sharp with that speech that he gave right after the Bay of Pigs, and I think that also sealed his fate. So and I just want to throw this into you because Thaddeus Stevens was in Lincoln. They were all in the same group. But Stevens, I don't think you could ever trust. But here's what's said about him with regard to the 14th Amendment. He, meaning Stevens, found the 14th Amendment final provisions with a limited disqualification from office for some former Confederates. He found that deeply disappointing, but accepted it as the best terms possible. And yet this is what he wanted. He wanted to put the Confederate States under a prolonged, if you will, probation period under military rule until they kind of showed that they were ready to come back. Now, that to me, those two beliefs or passions or whatever you want to call it are kind of contradictory. On one hand, he thought the 14th Amendment was too harsh, and yet he wants to do this.
Yeah.
So, but again, it goes back to what you were saying as well. What is the subtextual plot going on here? And I think it's because there is a script and things have to be done. And remember, Stevens was making money privately in business with that cotton for beef deal that very few people know about, that was never told about in our history books, where you had Confederate and Union officers or personnel, government personnel, meeting up in Montreal to hammer out
stuff.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's almost laughable. You remember Wayne's World?
Yeah.
Remember when they're playing hockey in the street and a car comes by, they take the net up and they go, game off. And then they come back and go, game on if the car's left. Well, that's what they were doing during the war. When the beef was going south and the cotton was going north, it was time out, game on. Game out. I mean, it's if it weren't so tragic, it would be really funny.
Let me give you another quote, one more quote from President Johnson. He's really decrying the Reconstruction here. He says, don't do it, guys. He says, here is a bill of attainder against 9 million people at once. It is based upon an accusation so vague. Remember, Orwell would write 100 years later how tyranny thrives in ambiguity, one of his main themes of his writing. Here is based on an accusation so vague as to be scarcely intelligible and found to be true upon no credible evidence. Not one of the 9 million was heard in his own defense. The representatives of the doomed parties were excluded from all participation in the trial. The conviction is to be followed by the most ignominious punishment ever inflicted on large masses of men. It disenfranchises them by hundreds of thousands and degrades them all, even those who are admitted to be guiltless, from the rank of freemen to the condition of slaves. And then Montgomery adds this: President Johnson did not realize the king ruled, and that back in 1845, Congress had declared admiralty law to have come onto land. And this was a result of the insular cases of the 1840s. And remember, that's one of the two questions I would like to ask Montgomery, get clarification about. The other one is the Council of State. What was that? But yeah, these insular cases is where we got admiralty.
Mm-hmm.
The Reconstruction Act against the southern states who were helpless to resist military rule without the aid of the judiciary went forward unhampered. Once the judiciary decided to look the other way, the de jure Constitution's days were numbered. Puppet governments were founded in these various states under military auspices. One by one, sure enough, these puppet state governments ratified the 14th Amendment, which their more independent predecessors had rejected. This is also covered in a paper by the Tulane Law Review called The Dubious Origin of the 14th Amendment. To regress just a moment, remember that after the war, after the states rejoined the Union, again, the representatives of the South took their seats in Congress. Now, despite the fact that the southern states had been functioning peacefully for 2 years and had been counted to secure the ratification of the 13th Amendment, nevertheless, Congress then passed the Reconstruction Act, which provided for the military occupation of 10 of the 11 southern states. It excluded Tennessee military occupation, and one must suspect that it was because Tennessee had ratified the 14th Amendment.
Yeah, Tennessee, as I said kiddingly weeks ago, always seems to get a pass, even though it was considered a Confederate state. But then again, that was a state that was probably torn because, though it's considered in the South, it really has a foot in both. And the same goes for Kentucky and West Virginia.
But at least Kentucky, I know, did not ratify the 14th Amendment. I'm not sure about West Virginia.
No, and they were both considered northern states. But Tennessee was another one of those states which was, kind of heavily traveled by the Union armies and such. So I'm not saying there's anything that they abetted the Union cause. I don't know, maybe they did, but they seem to have gotten a pass with all this. One other thing I want to bring up, too, and I haven't looked at this for a long time, and it just came to mind, but during that the military rule, Florida convened their state legislature and came up with, I think, the Constitution of 1868, and the military heads in the state took a look at it and said, no, tear it up. Ain't going to happen. And they had to go back and make another one.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there you go. And another thing that I want to bring out, you could say that it was lawful for states to cede from the Federation if they chose to. And, of course, that was tested because of the Civil War. But because of the Civil War, it's never going to be allowed again because those states are tied in, as the Constitution said, and, of course, that was around for some time. But now it's clear that you're in the Federation and you're not getting out. There's even a practical element to that, too, and that is if states chose to do that, so much of their revenues go to the federal government, and they turn around and give them back. And a good example of this, I think, is what you would call like the gas tax. If they want to improve roads, well, the gas tax goes to the feds. The feds kick back money to the DOT. And the threat will be if you try to cede from the union, then you're going to be heavily leaned on. And Eric the blacksmith, living up in New England, made me aware of something that I had not known before. And to give an example of states that wanted to be recalcitrant, I think you may know about this. When Rhode Island refused to ratify the Constitution and Washington threatened to blockade them, put a boycott on them until they saw the light.
You know what? I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, Eric the blacksmith is going to be on to speak about the Anti-Federalist Papers, but he brought that to my eyes, and I thought that was interesting because here's another what you might call despotic action by Washington to go along with the Whiskey Rebellion and Shays Rebellion and some of the other smaller rebellions that nobody ever knows about that was part of this wave of resentment toward the founders for throwing the Articles of Confederation into the ocean and coming back with the Constitution. So here's another example of calling out the federal troops on the citizenry, and this was done by Washington. And you could argue, well, he had to. And it's like, fine, okay. He had to, but why did he have to? Because that was the arrangement between the federal government and the states.
And there's more dirt you can heap up on Washington. He was, of course, a secret society Freemason, and he was he had some inside knowledge in his real estate dealings. He knew Washington D.C. was going to be called the capital before almost anybody else, and he bought land and profited big time from it. That's inside trading stuff.
Well, how did he spend his time before his military service, or he might have been military service? Well, no, it was before he went in. He was a realtor. I mean, he went he went out, remember, and he brain fart. Don't you remember he went out and surveyed most of what was then called the West?
Yeah, for the king, right?
Yeah, so he knew the lay of the land. He knew exactly what might make it for a good possession, a purchase. So, yeah, there you go. But, again, these guys were nearly deified, and it's not in their behavior. When you go back and forth with people who want to go ahead and hold up the vanilla representation of these guys in books, in history texts, in movies, it's like, yeah, sure, a lot of great, everybody has great stuff said about them, and that's what goes into the record. And again, we mentioned this before. But then you have to take a look at what is also mentioned about these characters in other places, like the Anti-Federalist Papers, and then you take a look at their behavior. That says it all. Actions speak 1,000 words. So, I mean, these guys were out for themselves, and, our opinion of what they are or who they were is shaped by propaganda pretty much, and not what was the reality.
Absolutely. Hey, did you know that in this whole Reconstruction debacle that your good old home state of New Jersey actually performed with some aplomb? They actually showed some guts in the matter.
Yeah?
Yeah.
No,
when the representatives of New Jersey saw, first they had, of course, voted for the 14th Amendment, but when they saw that what was going on, that the South was going to be invaded unlawfully in violation of the Constitution, New Jersey rescinded, and they were not going to support the Reconstruction Acts and the 14th Amendment, and then so their representatives were kicked out. Their senator was kicked out, and Montgomery writes in here. It's a quote from March 24th, 1968. It's Joint Resolution Number 1 of the state of New Jersey. A quote. I don't know the individual who says it, but there's a long paragraph here. I won't write it, but these guys in New Jersey had the guts to call the Reconstruction Acts the mutilating of the integrity of the United States Senate. They called it a usurpation, and they called it martial law. And, of course, New Jersey itself, even though they're in the north, they were attacked.
Well,
this was a northern rump of Congress, and there are several old quotes Montgomery gives where they're called a rump Congress in the north that did this. Montgomery actually correctly identifies this as a coup d'etat. That's what the Reconstruction really was, Al. It was a coup d'etat. Those are Montgomery's words. I don't have. There's a quote in here, more than one, where he identifies it as that.
A couple things, if I may.
Yeah.
Did you just create a new tense for read? What did you say?
What did I say?
I
don't know.
I won't write it here. I'm like, what is that? Like the past particular preposition?
Oh, did I say I won't write it here?
Yeah, you said you write it. All right, I couldn't let that one go by.
Too early. Sorry.
No, not a problem. But to be serious, and this is a little-known fact about the good old Garden State, there was something at play there with regard to the Confederate cause, in a sense, and the issue about abolition. And this is true. If you take the Mason-Dixon line and you extend it east, it will go through New Jersey. I'll say roughly it cuts it into like 2/3, 1/3. Well, up until sometime in the 20th century, and I can't remember what the date was, schools beneath the Mason-Dixon line could observe segregation. So you see, New Jersey has a funny little role in this as well, and I don't know if that played into how its representatives in D.C. felt, but, there's a situation. So even though, like you said, they were in the north, they were, but not everything. That little whatever that is that sticks out by Cape May and the southern part of the state could observe segregation. So there you go.
Got it. Yeah. Well, Al, apparently, you know how we have to have a license for everything nowadays? That stems from the Reconstruction.
Do you want to care to elaborate on that?
Well, Montgomery writes, he lists a bunch of licenses we have to have today. Marriage, hunting, fishing, business licenses. He says, every license or permit is a use tax and is financial slavery. You are controlled in every aspect of your life. All licenses came about after the 14th Amendment and the military occupation which we are still now under. The reason all this has taken place? Oh, you'll like this quote, Al. The reason all this has taken place in America is to colonize the world for Britain. The United States has been the enforcement arm / cannon fodder for Britain since the Civil War. Your comment.
Old timers used to talk about, not that this was a big topic, but I do remember that they said early in the 20th century, when cars were at least affordable or starting to become affordable to the average person, whatever that is, you didn't need licenses. The only thing you needed to drive on the roads was a car. But people think that's a state document, and even though it's issued by the state, it's federal, and as I've said here, it's in cap letters, you in cap letters, and also the number that you're first given will remain with you until your expiration. And I told you I had 7 of them, and that number has traveled with me since 1968. And you're going to love this, though. I have to go back for a new license as if I were never licensed before. Now, get this. I've been driving since 68, have had the same driver license number since 1968. No problems ever with my citizenship. But come this August, I'm going to have to go to the DMV and provide a state-issued, a government-issued, it says, birth certificate, my Social Security card, 2 pieces of documentation that state I live at the address which I espouse I do. And I'm like, what is the point of this? I mean, what's changed? It's still me. I haven't gone anywhere. I haven't, left the country and come back. And I am me. What is the problem here? So I have to laugh because I can't for the life of me figure out why in the world I have to produce at this period in time with, remember, a yearly relationship with the DMV. Now I got to prove that I am who I am, and I have a Social Security number, which I can't, again, for the life of me, figure out what they need that for. What's that got to do with anything? But here is what I'm talking about. When you get involved in totalitarianism, they can call it socialism in its early periods. Everybody thinks it's a good thing. But when you get involved in a state-controlled everything, you are never left alone. They bust your chops forever. And even, that in itself would drive some people crazy.
Yeah.
So I have to go trucking down here. Now, remember 2 things. What happens if I wasn't born in a hospital? What happens if it was a home birth? What do you do then? Where's your government license? Birth certificate. And secondly, believe this or not, I don't have any bills sent to this address. As I think you well know, I've kept the P.O. box down here for 19 years. I can't show my address. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do. So, everything gets sent to the P.O. box. All the bills. It's the 21st century, folks, and then you pay stuff online. So how do you get around that? All right. That's just something that seems trivial, but if you think about it, it really isn't. Literally, I could be refused a license because I can't produce documents, even though I don't have a point on my record, and I've been driving since 1968. It's crazy.
And, of course, when a license, in legal definition, means something that is illegal unless the king gives his...
Yeah, it's imprimatur, yeah.
And when's the last time, why is marriage illegal, for example? Why is being a barber illegal? If your neighborhood views your talents as a barber as worthy of patronage, why do you have to go and and show the government and have the government give their imprimatur on you? What about just your fellow neighbors?
Well, it's because the government's going to be good to you, and they want to share in your prosperity.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just thinking people should go check out that website. What is it, sharedprosperity.org or so? I'll take a look when you're talking about, I mean, this is a hint that the present Social Security situation is going to be changed, and that the government is going to get involved with you taking 5% of your salary. They're going to invest like, I don't know, maybe 1.5% of something, and you get to use the other 3.5%. Shared prosperity. It's like, well, who's sharing in this? I think you guys are sharing it, because I'm not. It's being taken from me. But, that's an interesting situation. I'll find out where that website is. But they're preparing people for the SSA to go the way of of nickel candy. And by the way, have you seen the picture of one of the newest IRS installations?
No.
Down in New Carrollton, Maryland? Holy mackerel. It's a pyramid.
Oh, I was going to guess. Yeah, okay.
And then these two columns that look like barbershop poles, black twined around white, with the index finger pointing upward. Actually, they could have used another finger for what they do to us, but they used the index finger, and of course that recalls, as it is above, it is below. And the pyramid, and in the pyramid, it's got "We the People."
You just named all the 4 occultic food groups or whatever. You got the pyramid, you got the 2 pillars, you got the black and white, black and white's another, the checkerboard, that's another.
Yeah, flooring,
Freemasonic symbol, and then the up down, so it is. Yeah, oh man.
But I'll put a link to the photo. But you can even go on to Google Maps or whatever. Go to just pop in IRS New Carrollton, Maryland, and you can get down on it. It's hard to pick out the pyramid, but it's there. The columns obviously are very much in your face. But it's like, why did you do that? I mean, of all the things you could have done, why do you do that? I mean, if that doesn't tell you who runs the show, I don't know. Amazing.
And again, that could not happen if churches had their head out of the sand.
You had me scared there for a second, big guy.
Well, we mentioned it earlier. I mean, churches think everything's hunky-dory in this country now, and the churches think they're not under persecution yet. It's right in their face. The occultists rule this country, and they're clueless. They've rejected the knowledge. They don't want any part of it. They want to be willfully ignorant of the evil and the occultism all around them, in high places, as Scripture warns you about.
Well, when I said you were scaring me, I was referring to a location which I thought you were going to mention, from which which agency has to pull its head out of. I didn't think you were going to say sand.
Oh, got it. Yeah. You mean the wrong end of the anatomy? Yeah.
All right, we're going to have to wrap it up. But if you want to bring up one more point, that's fine. If not, we'll pick it up.
Yeah, all right. Montgomery completely establishes that this military rule, this military occupation from the Reconstruction, it's still in order today, and it links. It's why Britain rules us. It's why it's the Master Blaster thing from Thunderdome, as you've mentioned before. It's why we're hooked to the IMF. He establishes that. And he even cites, last thing here, he cites how it's not even just the Constitution, but in the Federalist Papers, James Madison, it's not just the Constitution that says every state is guaranteed a Republican form of government. It's in the contract. But James Madison, in Federalist Paper number 43, he also said that. He said the authority of the federal government extends no further than to a guarantee of a Republican form of government. And nothing else shall exchange Republican for an anti-Republican Constitution. So, and that's exactly what the Reconstruction did. It denied a Republican form of government for 10 or 11 states. When you do that, you destroy the 1787 Constitution, Patriots, you need to see the bigger picture here about the 14th Amendment and your beloved Constitution. It's done. It was whatever privileges it gave you. It's over. The Republic lasted about 80 years, and that's it. We've been living under a military rule since then. That's. I'll close with that.
All right, and just as in a quick, it's not a summation, just I guess a P.S. When everybody says about destroying our country, destroying this, it's not on the people necessarily. But if you take a look at what's happening to us now and what has been happening for the last 20 years, I mean, could you find more destructive elements put in play? I mean, what would you expect to happen? I mean, what I'm referring to in particular is that a corporation sending jobs overseas. Corporations never asked to be patriotic and take care of people here. Jobs fleeing the country. Thousands, if not millions, of illegal immigrants allowed into the country. And I had to laugh because this immigration reform, illegal immigration reform, what reform? What are you talking about? Oh, if you stay here 8 years, blah, blah, blah. Look, don't come in. I don't care if they're Latinos. I don't care if they're Hungarians or whatever. It doesn't make any difference to me where they come from, and I understand why they're coming here. That's fine. Makes sense to me. But the point is, you can't have these kind of diametrically proposed actions going on and think that you're going to survive it. And we've got a debt to what extent, and yet we get involved in military intrigues, wall to wall, for God knows how many decades. Where's the money coming from? Now you want to go push against North Korea, and you want to push Iran. What do you think is going to happen? I mean, the destruction of this country is not on its people, because they've been told to believe that whatever we do is right. But what I see happening here, it's like if somebody from Mars came down and you explain this to them, they'd be like, that doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't, unless you want to destroy a country. And that's what they're doing here. They're taking everything they can get from us, draining us from the last drop of financial blood, and then they're going to throw us into a war and kick our asses. And then when we come back, we'll be nice little sheep, the kind of thing that the Patriots always complain about. Well, I mean, that's why we're having this happen to us. We've had a lot of freedom. We've had a lot of economic success. We've had it better than probably 99.99% of this globe. But we're not that way anymore, and it's going down the drain while people keep complaining that the other party's responsible for it, not realizing that they both have availed themselves, or I should say, been allowed to be used by the real power in the country. So I know that's a little long, but, this destruction of America wasn't something that we were architects of. And it's kind of shameful to see what happened. It's tragic, in fact. It's catastrophic. But this is why, this is where it's going. What you're referring to, what we've talked about for years, this is the object. This was the objective that was meant to be attained, and we're seeing it happen now. So, all right, listen, thank you very much for a very passionate representation of the Reconstruction Act, and we'll catch you all next time. This has been Once Upon a Time.